Scheduled. Oh, we're live. We're beyond schedule. We are now live. What's up, wrestling fans? What's up, Kevin? It is Sunday night. You know what that means. Because I really
It,
don't.
it means
You
it's
do,
the
I'm
Two
sure.
Bros Wrestling Show.
That's what it means. That's what I knew
That's
that.
what it
I
means.
I
It's
knew
that
that.
time every week where we get to talk wrestling, which is, obviously our favorite topic.
Clearly.
Um, and I'm really excited about tonight's show. Our main event topic tonight is the history. We're looking at the influence, the history, everything to do with Hispanic wrestling. Today is the last day of Hispanic Heritage Month. We thought it would be a fantastic topic to cover. But, Doug, we're probably about 10 minutes away from hitting that main event topic.
Do we have news? We have an opening
Do we have
bell.
news? There's always news in the world of wrestling. We're going to hit it, Doug, with what's a very fun, albeit brief, Tuesday Night War. Both WWE and AEW pulled out all the stops this past week for this one night only competition. I put that in quotes, I guess it would be fair to say, but the results are in, and WWE won the night easily.
Well, when you break the glass and bring in John Cena and Taker, you better win or something is seriously wrong.
NXT won in both total viewers and in the 18 to 49 demographic. NXT had a total audience of 921,000 and scored a 0.3 rating in the demo. Both are big numbers and top anything that show has done in years, which actually says quite a bit when you consider that just last week we were reporting on how ratings for NXT in general had been soaring. AEW brought in 609,000 viewers despite a stacked card. They fared better in the key demo. They were just 7% down, which, Tony should look at that as a moral victory since they were the ones that were away from their normal broadcast night. But truthfully, it was a winning night for the industry because both shows faced stiff competition with the 4 million people that were watching the baseball playoffs, as well as competition from hockey. And despite that, when you combine the total viewership for NXT and AEW on Tuesday, it was up in total viewers and in that 27% actually in that key demo from the last time that these two were head to head on Wednesdays, a year and however many months ago. So good night for wrestling fans.
That's the bottom line here, man. This was a good night for wrestling. Good night for wrestling fans. Those numbers, those are big numbers for a Tuesday night. Let's forget about the tribalism and the Tuesday night war and all that nonsense for just a minute. And look how many people turned out for wrestling.
Well, Doug, why don't you give a call to your buddy Tony and tell him that? Unfortunately,
I got some things about that at the end of the show. Okay,
Tony can't accept defeat quietly. Someone posted an AI generated photo of Shawn Michaels holding a Booker of the Year trophy, and Khan could not help but be petty and respond by saying he thought HBK had forfeited his chance at that award after Tuesday's show. And then he later made the decision to point out that the NXT show was the first time ever that The Undertaker and John Cena were on a wrestling broadcast that had fewer than 1 million viewers. So all of this is just to say that there are reports in AEW that there are many within the company that just wish someone would take Tony's phone away from him.
Right? It's like we're in the Trump administration again. Take Twitter away from Tony. Can we hashtag that? No Twitter for Tony.
Seriously, keep it classy, Tony.
Right? Just like San Diego, you need to stay classy.
Doug, an update on the story we had last week. Speaking of classy individuals, CM Punk wanting to return to WWE.
Excellent segue.
Apparently, the interest on the other side isn't as great as once was thought. Dave Meltzer is reporting that those within WWE have decided now is not the time for a reunion with Pepsi Phil, and that the negative far outweigh any of the potential positives for bringing him in. Now, granted, this could be a red herring, right? We got Survivor Series and Royal Rumble and other things coming up, but WWE is fond of noting that nothing is forever.
Right.
But according to Meltzer anyway, it's maybe not no forever. Current stance is it's a no right now.
Right, right. And aren't they doing this to allegedly to dispel any fan speculation and don't want to upset any fans come Survivor Series, which is in Chicago?
It would probably be good to level set those expectations because, as we saw recently with the Rock showing up, and then the whole who is going to be seen as mystery partner, if you have roads and signs pointing one direction, and you realize that's the anticipation of your audience, you best get out in front of that, or else all that you could possibly do is get a crowd to turn angrily upon you.
Yeah. Especially when Pepsi Phil's dropping hints that, he has some free time coming up real soon and he'll be in Chicago.
Yeah,
So
exactly. He's not well. And maybe he was more hopeful that this was going to work out. But
I'm sure he was.
and speaking of old CM Punk, here's an update on Jack Perry. Jungle
Ah,
Jack, of course, was suspended from AEW after the altercation with Punk prior to All Out back in August. Punk, of course, that's the incident that ended up having cost him his job. And meanwhile, though, Perry himself has yet to return to TV, but the most recent reports are that Perry, in fact, is not still suspended, even though he has not yet appeared on television. Perry lost the FTW title to Hook at the pay-per-view, so it's not like he was in the middle of a storyline when this suspension occurred. They're just likely waiting for the right opportunity and story to reintroduce him, and reports are they're trying to put just as much time as they possibly can between that return and the incident as possible. Honestly, the
sure.
biggest issue I think for AEW is going to be how you bring him back and keep the hot heel act he had going when fans are likely going to want to welcome him back as a folk hero.
Absolutely. Jungle Jack, is going to be a folk hero to half of the AEW audience and a complete villain to the other half. So it's going to be interesting to see where the things fall.
How they bring him back. Someone who is not coming back, at least not right now, to Impact, former world champion, ended his time with the company. And that's as of October 1st. Sammy Callahan is now a free agent after his contract with Impact expired, ending a 6-year run he had with the promotion. Sammy has not ruled out the possibility of returning, but as right now, the two sides have not been able to reach agreement, with Callahan saying he believes he has brought more to the table than the current Impact offer would suggest.
Mm.
Stay tuned. We have a lot of roster changes to report with the SmackDown side of things. Nick Aldis has now been brought in as the SmackDown general manager, which was a bit of a surprise, but nice to see that the former Magnus has found himself work with the Big Fed. And then Kevin Owens has now he's been traded to SmackDown, which I guess that indicates that he and Sammy are done with their tag team for now.
I guess so. And can we talk about the pop Nick Aldis did not get when Triple H announced him? Nick Aldis. I mean, you could have announced Doug, and I think I would have got the same crowd reaction.
It just goes to show how in the bubble a lot of WWE fans are. They are just WWE fans. We cannot
Really, yeah,
presume that just
absolutely.
because you have been in the NWA and then prior to that under a different name in Impact, which was when more people would have had a chance to see him, honestly, than his NWA run, you're not going to necessarily have that same recognition. Obviously, Nick did not. I'm happy to see him. He's excellent on the mic, and I think he'll win
Hmm.
the crowd over. But it's like starting new for him. They have to learn him. They do not just automatically know who he is.
So, of course, in his case, they broke the glass and set out Dom.
Yeah,
There we go.
that works.
There we go.
One last SmackDown change is that Dragon Lee, who has continued a very quick ascent in WWE, continues to do so. He obviously was fast tracked once he came from AEW. They put him immediately in NXT major storylines, and then he even began making appearances on the main roster. Well, now apparently his move to the main roster is permanent. WWE
Nice.
quietly added his profile and switched it from NXT to place him on the SmackDown roster. So, congratulations, Dragon Lee.
Excellent.
Last night, MLW hosted their big Slaughterhouse pay-per-view, but had to make a quick pivot from their scheduled main event as Davey Boy Smith Jr. was unable to participate as
Uh-oh.
the challenger to the world champion Alex Kane. Tom Lawler stepped into that role. So if you're going to have somebody, Filthy Tom is a good one. But the switch was necessary because Davey Boy had to have emergency surgery for appendicitis and diverticulitis, had his appendix and part of his colon removed.
Wow.
And so that had to be painful, but best wishes for a quick recovery to Davey Boy. And then, Doug, I want to end the opening bell segment of tonight by 2 bits of NWA news. So are you ready for the territories to return?
I am so ready for territories to return.
Billy Corgan is with you. NWA sent out a news release this week announcing the NWA is bringing back the territory system. NWA World Heavyweight Champion EC3's Exodus Pro promotion out of Cleveland was revealed as the first of these new NWA affiliates in this modern era. That federation was now going to be known as the NWA Exodus Pro Midwest. And the NWA is looking for new affiliates to its territory system, both domestically and internationally.
Oh, is this the perfect time for us to start the Two Bros Wrestling Alliance?
And join in with the NWA?
Partner with William Patrick Corrigan?
Well, Billy himself was also being interviewed this week and divulged that the NWA has signed not one, but 2 separate TV deals, Doug. So we'd better pull that promotion together quick. It might be the right time. If he's telling the truth. I mean, it is Billy. I'm just saying. Because he did not provide details other than to say that these deals are with top 20 cable networks. So he said the opportunity, he took this opportunity also to kind of slam on YouTube, which was interesting because, said they were bad partners for wrestling, even though that's where Corgan had primarily found this NWA audience in this modern era. And of course, the good folks at YouTube have been particularly great partners with the Two Bros Wrestling Show, making sure the algorithm works in our favor by providing you and prioritizing this great content you're watching right now.
Indeed, it does.
We will see and we'll report where it is that the NWA lands. I hope it's true. Obviously, a top 20 cable network is another win for wrestling fans. Different product, different flavor, and maybe a new way to watch. All these new territories popping up.
I like it.
And with that, Doug.
Main event time. Excellent. I've got notes. Hold on.
Main event time, man. I have been excited for this one. A lot of times the Two Bros Wrestling Show in our main event, we get to talk about the news of the day, something current, hot takes and reactions, previews, things. But every now and then we do a deep dive on a looking at wrestling history. And I kind of look at this as a piece to some of the most highly engaged content we've had in the past. I know one of the most watched shows we've ever done was the one we did for Women's History Month. Mm-hmm. And we also had a really high engagement for the show we did about the history of racism in wrestling. And I look at this as sort of a third part to those, still in the archives, by the way, those if you want to go watch. But Doug, we're here to talk about Hispanic wrestling. Today is the last day of Hispanic Heritage Month, and thought it would be the perfect time to talk about the influence of Hispanic pro wrestling.
Indeed.
It cannot be discounted just how influential Hispanic pro wrestling has been. And I'm going to start by just saying this, Doug. I don't know if this is that bold a statement or not, but I would venture to say that of all the wrestling communities around the world, that no wrestling community has influenced the global style, the amateur Anglo style, more than that of Hispanic wrestling.
I think that's fair. Even like the folks in New Japan, and Japan send their folks on excursions, and most of those folks who go on excursions end up in South America or south of the border from here. So yeah, I think that's a very fair statement.
And I mean, when you think Hispanic wrestling, Doug, I don't know about you, but what is the first thing you think of when you think of wrestling in Mexico?
Lucha, the masks,
Lucha
man.
and the mask, man. That's exactly right. When you envision Mexican wrestling and Lucha Libre, the things that I think of are colorful masks and colorful costumes, as well as high-flying maneuvers.
Oh, absolutely.
And Lucha Libre, if you translate what Lucha Libre actually means, it means in English, it translates as free fight or freestyle wrestling. And obviously, the type of wrestling that has come to define Lucha Libre is a far cry from what we resemble when we think of American and European freestyle amateur
Right.
wrestling.
Yeah.
The Lucha take on the American version of the sport, it's Hispanic roots, Doug. Here's some of those beautiful masks that you were talking about.
Love those masks.
I know, right?
Love those masks. Should have broke up
I,
my collection for tonight. I didn't
I
want to
kind
take
of
away.
expected that you
I didn't want to cosplay a Lucha Libre tonight, though. I really didn't. I mean,
you didn't want to
this
look like appropriation when we're trying to show appreciation.
exactly, exactly. But this dwarfs my mask collection.
Well, disclosure, not my personal collection, though I wish it was. The masks are absolutely a beautiful part of the Lucha Libre culture that has added so much to the global version of professional wrestling. But Doug, I think it's easy for people to mistake that the Mexican version of the sport was just a take on the American version. In actuality, if you look back when Lucha Libre and Mexican wrestling started, the origins are pretty close to when the American version began.
Mm-hmm.
So Anglo wrestling from America and Europe was notoriously mat based. So obviously we had to get the high flying in. And then, as we said, that those beautiful masks and all that was to come, because the original version of the sport actually not that different than its American cousin. And Lucha Libre first became popular in Mexico around the same time as in America, and that's 1860s, 1870s, which is surprising. But Doug, you're looking at the first Mexican wrestler.
Hey, Kevin, how do you pronounce that last name?
I was just going to go with Enrique, Doug.
Enrique U is what we would call him.
There obviously were Mexican wrestlers in the 1860s, and this was really just like in the United States, that was the era when wrestling was still a legitimate contest. And so what was quote unquote pro wrestling was people getting paid to do that amateur style. But just like in the US, Mexican wrestling became really popularized in the early 1900s. But just like its American counterpart, it started to change from these shoot contests to something a little more flamboyant and a little more entertainment. This man here, Enrique U, Doug, is credited anyway with inventing the style that we now think of as Mexican wrestling, when he adapted the Greco-Roman style into the modern pro wrestling style in Mexico. Enrique was just 13 years old when he saw a strong man named Romulus, and he took this man as an inspiration, decided he was going to start, bodybuilding and all that, and he became known as Mexico's strongest man. This was at a time when there wasn't really much in the way of competition for him other than to travel and do sideshows and circuses. And he had such a legitimate Greco-Roman background that he was actually brought to the United States for the World's Fair in St. Louis and asked to be a judge of Olympic wrestling.
This is really, really cool because Enrique here looks the part of a modern day professional wrestler. I mean, he really does. You colorize this, run it through something, colorize, say this is an up and coming indie star, and I always say, okay, what what was this guy training on back in the day? First off,
he doesn't look like someone from the 1900s that was an amateur wrestler at all with that build. He traveled the world, and he was basically an attraction. He would travel the world putting on these displays that were the combination of Greco-Roman and Olympic style wrestling. And it was this combo that provided the foundation for what would become Lucha Libre.
Here we
Doug,
go.
This is when it starts, my friend. Much like American wrestling, Lucha started really as a regional thing. It was just little tiny territories. We were just talking about the territory system.
Mm-hmm.
You watched your local wrestling, or you went to the local carnival and watched wrestling. There wasn't a national presence, but that began to change in the 1930s. Again, really strange how it mirrors what happened in the United States, because that happened in the US about the same time too. And the man we're looking at here, Doug, is the person who really started the nationalization of Mexican wrestling. That's Salvatore Luthroth. He was a property tax inspector for the Mexican government, and during a trip across the border in 1929 to El Paso, Texas, Salvador witnessed a pro wrestling event for the first time and was intrigued enough to start looking for some financial backing. I think I'm giving it away here, Doug. Can you guess what happened when he got that financial backing?
He started Extreme Wrestling.
Close. You were very, very close. He did found the what is considered the very first of the Mexican wrestling federations, and what he founded in 1933 was actually called Empresa Mexicana de Lucha Libre, which translated as the Mexican Wrestling Enterprise. But that was the first national foothold that pro wrestling had in Mexico, and that company's name would later be changed to, and I never get this right, but it's Consejo Mundial de la Lucha Libre Corporation, or CML.
CMLL, yeah.
CMLL for short. And this is still in existence today, Doug. And it's funny that we're doing this because just last night, AEW was talking about CMLL, and we're saying some of the things we're saying now. CMLL is the oldest pro wrestling promotion in the world that is still in existence today. So a lot of history there with CMLL.
That is awesome that we have CM. See, no, I can't do it. I don't want to go into the CM Punk thing. We're not talking
like trying about to go back and say like the old WWF.
Yes, I was watching. Actually, I was watching Dutch Mantel earlier today talking about the WWF.
It's hard, man. It's hard to really get that extra letter in there. But CMLL,
yes,
the very first promotion that was national in Mexico, and the still in existence, the oldest promotion in the world today. But Doug, I know earlier when I said, what's the first thing you think of? The first thing I think of when I think Mexican wrestling, just like you, are those amazing masks, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So do you know, when it comes to lucha and mask, exactly when that tradition started?
You know, I was thinking it was right around this time when, CMLL, wow, I'm going to have a hard time saying that now, was born.
We'll move on from CMLL.
Around the 1930s, 1929, 1930, somewhere in that area, when CMLL was taken. Oh, looky, there we go.
You are that I'm impressed, because I really did. I thought that the lucha mask went back to the beginnings of Mexican wrestling, or at least close to it. But we're almost 70 years into Mexican wrestling before we see our first mask. And you were correct. It was 1933, around that same time as the founding of CMLL, that this man, El Cyclone Mickey, was the first one to don a mask. He had it commissioned, and it went over so big, needless to say, it took off. But old El Ciclone here had a bit of an interesting backstory. Doug, do you know what that is?
I am not.
Know anything about this?
I am not. He does not pop up in my notes. So tell me about Mr. McKee here.
Well, that's exactly right. Mr. McKee's real name, not El Ciclone, obviously, but Corbin James Macy. He was an Irishman from Missouri.
So we've kind of got a El Generico operation going on here.
That shocked me. I actually learned something doing research for our show, that the very first masked luchador was not a Mexican wrestler. He was a Irishman from Missouri.
I love that, and I really, really wonder now if El Generico is a bit of a nod to that, where we have the the Canadian-born Syrian redhead
luchador.
I really wonder now.
He was the very first wrestler to work mask in Mexico, and his character was he sometimes went by La Marviela. Oh, I can't get it. Basically, the Mask Marvel. So he
Uh-huh.
went under a lot of different names, but the Mask were so popular. And again, he had a commission, and this is really, I mean, yes, we can give him credit for being the first, but this is the man that we really owe the credit to for Mask Lucha Libre, because this is the man who created these masks. I said Cyclone was looking to have one made, and he went to this man, Don Antonio Martinez. Martinez, he was a textile worker, and he had already gotten involved in boxing in America. And when doing that, making boots for boxers, he began making boots for wrestlers. And so
Okay.
when El Ciclone needed a mask, he wanted to see, hey man, you do wrestling gear. Can you make me? And he basically laid out what he wanted. But fans fell so in love with the mask that Don recognized an opportunity, and his mask making shop is still in operation right near the famous Arena Mexico in Mexico City.
That mask looks terrifying, first off. Let me just say that. And with these old eyes, it looks like he's holding a head in the other picture.
I'm not saying that Don didn't know a guy who knew a guy, so I mean, I just wouldn't mess with him. But
I
yeah,
mean,
somehow, even though it doesn't have all the ornamentation we now associate with Lucha Mask, that first Lucha Mask is kind of creepy looking.
but again, it's a perfect look at the birth of this and how far it's come. Now you think I think most of our viewers and wrestling fans in general, when we say lucha now, especially with our American fan base anyway, you're thinking Rey Mysterio right off the bat. Rey
Of
Mysterio
course.
with the very stylized masks, a theme to go with whatever he has going on. This plain black and white mask is terrifying.
It was
I'm,
terrifying, but man, the fans reacted to it. I'm
I'm
not sure
sure,
if El
man.
Ciclone was a heel or a face, but to your point, that's scary enough. I'm hoping he's working heel.
Me too, but you know what? It's white, so maybe he's a baby face. I don't know. Good guys wear white, man.
Well, that was the 30s, so yeah, we have 100 years now of the mask tradition in Mexico, and and if CMLL brought it to national prominence, what really made wrestling take off in Mexico, Doug? This is probably not a surprise as to the where and when of this. I think we probably can guess that, but it was just like in the United States, the 50s, and it was for the same reason that you can probably think.
Hold on, I've lost my notes.
50s and 60s is when it really boomed in Mexico for television.
I saw. See now. Okay, well, okay. My notes are wrong. Not wrong, but we're doing a time jump.
Different.
Sorry.
Oh, no.
No, no,
If I'm in
no.
the 50s and 60s, you go right ahead.
Yeah, I was just looking at the post. Well, it falls into the early 50s with that post World War II boom.
Yeah.
Which again goes back to television, like you were saying.
Yeah, I mean, wrestling around in the United States was territorial, regional, and you went to your arenas and watched it. But once you had the ability to broadcast it across, the country, well, Mexico had the same thing going on there. And the 50s and 60s is when the wrestling boom really occurred in Mexico. And Doug, obviously, we can't. I mean, there's no 1 hour that's going to give us a comprehensive look at all of the history of
That
Mexican wrestling, but
right.
just trying to hit some highlights. We think of CMLL still being in existence. For the longest time, they were pretty much your WWF. They were the big dogs, and everybody else was clawing. But we did end up eventually with competition.
Yeah. Lucha Libre Worldwide. Whoa, so what is the triple A for? If they're Lucha, I never realized they were Lucha Libre Worldwide, but why are they triple A then? I'm so confused now.
It's got to be a lost in translation thing. It's like
Where
why
where
the the New
Me
Japan title, you have to explain to people why it's the International Wrestling Grand Prix Championship, but you're New Japan Pro Wrestling. Why isn't it the New Japan World title? But
yeah,
yeah, Lucha Libre Worldwide AAA.
Chick-fil-A.
Yeah, that was the first real competition that CMLL had, and that didn't happen, Doug, until we're jumping now into like the 80s and 90s.
Okay.
So a retired wrestler, there he is, Antonio Pena, one of the bookers for CMLL, and he was clashing with his co-booker Juan Herrera. And obviously, we're going to oversimplify here because any sort of he said
Oh yeah, yeah.
is complicated. But the oversimplification is that Herrera favored the old traditional style of heavyweight wrestling that CMLL was known for and is still known for, very realistic mat-based type of wrestling, while Pena wanted to feature younger talents, stars like Conan and Octagon, names that older fans are probably familiar with. And CMLL's owner sided with Herrera. So Pena would go on his own, branch off, and in 1992 he founded AAA. And Doug, I was surprised by that when you think of you're going with these young guys like Octagon and Conan and things. Well, that's starts to be the era of lucha that most of us become
Right.
familiar with.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, the real high flying, fast style of wrestling is not as it does not go all the way back to the roots of Mexican wrestling, just like the masks don't go all the way back.
So this is cool because I was looking for this too, trying to find out when this lucha style, like the high flyers, when that kind of came into existence. Because I'm thinking, this is a what I want to call a traditional style that goes back, and is rooted in culture. But it was
Yeah.
it was really a disagreement about personal preference in wrestling.
What
And
is wrestling, right?
what is
What
wrestling?
is real professional wrestling?
Right.
Which it is so many parallels. We went through that in this country too. Like,
Yes.
the old guys like Luthez, and you hear stories about they didn't want to bounce off the ropes because physics really, you wouldn't really bounce off the ropes. They wouldn't even rebound, much
Right.
less, jump off of the top or anything like that. So those old school guys wanted to keep it real looking, and obviously the type of work that Antonio Pena champion look more like what you would expect from a superhero cartoon.
Well, you got the masks, you got the colors. You think Pena got a lot of grief for killing the business, and going
Oh
in
yeah,
this direction? Yeah.
100%.
Oh, yeah.
100%. And obviously, he didn't kill CMLL. It's not the
Uh-huh.
WCW WWF dynamic where one drives the other out of business. Both are
Right.
still in existence. But when you consider the fact that CMLL is the oldest promotion in the entire world, um, they are not the ones I first think of when I think of Mexican wrestling.
Same.
I
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, when you think of Mexican wrestling promotion, if I say name a Mexican wrestling promotion, what's the first
It's
thing you're
it's
going to
tr
name?
it's totally AAA, which is confusing to me now that I see the symbol, again, the logo like that. But yeah, AAA, absolutely.
And I think it's because, most of us came of age around that time. And if Pena formed AAA in 92, just a few years later is when your Paul Heyman started bringing Mexican talent up into ECW, and eventually Eric Bischoff saw that and would do the same and bring
Exactly.
these guys over to WCW. So that '90s era of high flying, what we think of as lucha libre, which really was a more at that time just a vibrant change in that style. We were being exposed to the roots of it, whether we really knew it or not.
And that's again, that's so cool because you have, like you said, you mentioned Heyman, ECW coming up at that time. You have WCW bumping heads with WWE, WWF at that time, and all this going on. And it is really, really fascinating to see the parallels now, where you have basically the young upstart. You could almost liken this to a ECW type
Yeah.
promotion.
Yeah, that was like ECW killing the business, as you
Yeah,
said,
because
right? Like
because
people
because it,
just
it
really
is
didn't.
yeah, it's that alternative to the well, the oldest wrestling company in the world. This not even a young upstart. This guy was a former wrestler who moves on over and decides to do his own thing, inject some new life into it. So fascinating. It's very much an ECW thing now, which I never realized before.
And it's easy to take for granted now when within minutes I could give you any obscure wrestling promotion and or wrestler I can possibly dig up, and within minutes you're watching his work, right? I mean,
Absolutely, yes.
this was the days though when American wrestling fans, you either had to uh, trade for tapes or you had to hope that American promoters would occasionally bring in some of these talents. My first exposure to Mexican wrestling, really before even the high flying style of the 90s and ECW and all that, when we started to see it on our TV screens with the WCW and things, is I read about them in the wrestling magazines. Like it seemed like a million miles away, like a whole different world of professional wrestling. But I remember reading about wrestling in Mexico a lot in Pro Wrestling Illustrated and Inside Wrestling and all those wrestling magazines. We would occasionally have the Hispanic wrestlers that were part of promotions, but they were far and few between. Doug, do you have any memories of what the first real Hispanic or Mexican talent was that you were familiar with, that you saw on your own TV?
I really think it had to be, in the early days of the Monday Night Wars, where WCW was bringing in the likes of, like, you had Juventud Guerrera, La Parca, I think maybe even Psychosis, back in the day.
Psychosis.
Of course, you've got your Rey Mysterio Jr. at the time, and of course Eddie Guerrero, Chavo Guerrero, but Juventud Guerrero, those are
that was really, that was the golden age for us of like
I think
getting
I
to
just
learn
wrote
what
off.
Lucha Libre was.
I think I just mentioned most of the original Latino World Order, Vampiro, and of course
They're still
Conan.
around, man.
Yeah,
Yeah, Conan.
absolutely. But
Conan.
those I think I have to thank Eric Bischoff for my introduction to Lucha Libre and these crazy high flyers and these masked men. And I'm pretty sure that's a La Parca mask that he has there with the orange trim on it.
So the first two Hispanic wrestlers I can remember were actually, I would never have, I wouldn't necessarily equate them with the Lucha Libre style. So, because they dated back to the 80s before that style was really prominent on American television. And it's these two guys right
Oh,
here.
yeah. Okay. Fair enough.
There on the left, Tito Santana, and
Yeah.
then there on the right, down in the if Tito was the Hispanic presence in WWF, the NWA had Manny Fernandez, who I think is overlooked. I don't know if you remember Manny or not.
I don't. I automatically recognize Tito, but I really don't think of Tito. Yeah. Again, we're getting to like maybe some stereotypes here, but I'm stuck on luchas when I think
Yeah.
Hispanic wrestlers. Tito is this just a good looking kid who can really wrestle to me. you know?
And that's the thing, is that when you look at the influence of uh, Hispanic culture on wrestling, you think Lucha Libre, when
Mhm.
it's even broader than that. There was I
Absolutely.
mean, Tito was a good guy. Manny was a good guy. This was at a time when if you were not from America and you were presented on television, you were usually painted as the heels. And
Mhm.
now they still face stereotypes. I think you probably remember, Tito's war cry
I mean,
basically was,
yeah. Mhm.
and Manny Fernandez, the Raging Bull, there, his finishing maneuver. If you don't remember Manny, I won't quiz you on his finisher, but yeah, it was called the Flying Burrito.
No, it was
Um,
not.
it was. I'm afraid that it absolutely was. So,
Those were different times. Different times.
and and there was a lot that they had to overcome. Still, obviously. Doug, I know
Oh.
that you ran off quite a few, but um, as we start talking about the overall influence, again, we know we can't name everybody, but I'd love to go through some of the lucha legends and the pioneers of the
Mm,
sport,
sure.
if we could.
Let's do it. Santo.
This guy.
This is a great look. I love this dude's look already.
He was really the first lucha star. Like, no talk of Hispanic wrestling can be had without El Santo, who many consider the most famous Mexican wrestler ever. He began in 1942, and his rise obviously coincided with the boom of television in the 50s and 60s. This guy was a TV star. He was not just a TV wrestling star. He starred in television shows and he made 12 movies.
That's
all
amazing.
In his mask, of course. All in his mask.
Living the gimmick.
And of course, every good guy has to have a bad guy to fight, right?
Blue Demon, yes. I've got a list of, I tried to compile a list of, like, say the top 10 of these, which was so incredibly hard.
Oh,
but
gosh.
El Santo and Blue Demon both make the list. Yeah, because like you said,
they were forever there.
Right, because you've got Santo with what they call him, the silver mask, and now versus Blue Demon, a very color themed feud they had, I guess.
And like you said, it was a lot of monochromatic looks. That wasn't like the ornamentation that would come to be. One guy in a simple white silver mask, the other in a simple blue mask. But yeah, Blue Demon was his biggest rival, and they fought for decades, not just years. They had quite 1948 is when Blue Demon started. And I think he went all the way up into maybe the 80s, maybe into
I've got
early 90s.
89.
Yeah.
All the way to 89.
That's crazy.
Yes.
How old would he have had to be?
Blue Demon also, Kevin, had 25 films to his credit.
Yeah.
According to my notes here.
I love they often guys. Started, even though they fought each other as rivals, they were like most wrestlers who you travel the roads with a lot. They became really good friends and made movies together. Yeah, a lot of Mexican horror films, I think, is what both of them really specialized in. And of course, no one thought twice about the fact that these actors were in masks because, of course, they are. Blue Demon never takes his mask off.
So now I have this Tarantino-esque movie idea where El Santo and Blue Demon, finish wrestling, hop in a car, and on their way to their next venue, and they're driving together to the next town. They're like popping off like script ideas to each other and doing treatments in the car for horror movies that they could be in.
Hey, if either of these two legends were still around, they probably would sign on to that movie treatment right away. We can get that made. I wanted to have some female representation, and I went here with Irma Gonzalez because she is considered the pioneer of Mexican women's wrestling. But I would have loved even more female representation, but it probably comes as no surprise to anyone watching is that just like in America, again, all the parallels, right? Women faced tremendous resistance for years in Mexico, just as they did here. Irma, she debuted in 1955. She didn't retire until 96.
Wow.
And during her career, she managed to become a star in Mexico, despite women not even being allowed to wrestle in Mexico City and Arena del Mexico for decades. She took her talent elsewhere, and that included not just the rest of Mexico, but she went to all Japan. She crossed the border and would wrestle for world-class championship wrestling in Texas. So she definitely paved the way for luchadoras, stars like Fabi Apache and Sexy Star, and a lot of the Mexican women wrestlers, Thunder Rosa, that you have today. Quite a bit to Irma.
This is good because I was having trouble finding anything on women's wrestlers. This is Irma.
And just like the early women wrestlers in America, it was, who do I fight? Sometimes it was the men because there was no one for her to be an opponent with. Doug, this next one is probably the first true luchador that I saw. And primarily it was in the magazines at first. But Mil Mascaras.
Yes.
The man of a million masks. he would occasionally do one-offs in the U.S. territories. Did you ever see him when he came into like Mid-Atlantic or Georgia
I don't,
or?
I have no recollection of him. Like I said, the basically the LWO I was rolling off earlier is my real first memories of luchadors. Yeah, this Mr. Million Mask here is someone else that popped up in my research, but this
Well, I
again
will
is a
say that
great look.
I'm not like 20 years older than Doug or anything. If anybody's wondering, I, I, I think I got cable maybe first where I lived as
Yes,
opposed to where Doug lived.
yes, this is so true.
But yeah, he came into WWF in the 70s. I don't remember that because I didn't get WWF at the time, but I do remember him making a couple of NWA appearances, and I religiously read Pro Wrestling Illustrated and all those magazines, and would read of the this colorful character at a time when there wasn't that same sort of flair in Americans' version of the sport. Um, he's really given credit too for being one of the first to introduce high flying moves to the sport of wrestling. So pre AAA and the boom of the 90s and the young guys, Mil Mascaras was one who would go to the top rope, which was very rarely seen back in those days. It was like him and Jimmy Snuka and just a handful of guys that ever went all the way to the top.
This is a big dude to be going to the top rope too, or at least he looks. He's
He
a thick
did.
boy. Look, I mean, look at
He's a
that. It's
thick
barrel
boy.
chested dude.
That's a great segue, Doug, because here's this next gentleman. You're going to be familiar with him, and you might
Yes.
not.
Look at that forehead, man. Look at that forehead. Who has done a blade job or two in their lifetime?
Man, I wanted to include Carlos because we're celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month, and we're so heavy concentrated on Lucha Libre because that is what people think of, and that Mexican style. We can't overlook the Puerto Rican style and the Puerto Rican influence on wrestling. Whether it's Damian Priest and Selena Vega today, back to your Savio Vegas, and then all the way back to Carlos himself, who was a wrestling god in to this day on the island. He is a wrestling god. And Doug, I think you just kind of hinted on it already by that forehead. When you think the Puerto Rican style of wrestling, what is it that you think of? It's not high flying.
But it is not high flying, man. And it's funny because the thing I was watching today with Dutch was talking about, Brody, Bruiser Brody, and the incidents in Puerto Rico, and how Puerto Rico is just such an incredibly rough and violent territory. And I think that forehead shows off, what they're known for. My
Ric
goodness.
Flair and the NWA guys, all wrestlers would travel to Puerto Rico for these huge shows that they'd have across the island, and you just knew that the crowd was going to be hot. You hoped you got out of there alive, and everyone was going to bleed. I mean, we're going to spend a lot of time. We've already spent a lot of time talking about Lucha Libre and the influence of high flying. I just didn't want to lose the fact that the Hispanic influence on wrestling, the hardcore scene that became part subculture in professional wrestling, owes a tremendous debt to the island that bled, and this man
The
who
island
bled
that bled.
constantly. Yeah,
Man, you could not have
hardcore.
picked a better picture, dude. I mean, excellent choice.
And his son is back in WWE, right?
And that's cool.
That's nothing but cool. Also, nothing but cool, Doug. These men right here.
Indeed.
You mentioned them earlier. One of wrestling's most famous families, not Mexican wrestling's famous families, but all of wrestling's famous
Yes.
families. You cannot talk, though, the Mexican version of the sport without talking about the Guerreros. Their roots go all the way back to the TV era that started in the 50s and 60s, and that's what the patriarch Gory Guerrero, who's the one in the suit there. So going left to right, you have Mondo, Gory, Chavo Sr., Hector, and then a young Eddie G. Doug, who was the first Guerrero that you actually saw wrestle? I have a feeling since you mentioned all those 90s guys earlier, it's going to be Eddie.
It's Eddie. Absolutely. Latino Heat, way before he was Latino Heat, man. But yes, Eddie.
How am I so much older than you?
Dude, you nailed it earlier because I didn't get WWF until much later.
I
Even though
think for me, I think for me it was Hector. I know that Eddie wasn't the first, but I believe I saw Hector first, and I'm afraid to say that it probably was wrestling on WTBS under the horrible laser tag gimmick. They put this like toy helmet basically on him, and he come to a ring with like a laser gun, and it was awful gimmick, but I also had never seen guys move like that. He was moving around the ring like a Guerrero, flying everywhere, and it was fascinating. Even though the gimmick was stupid, I was glued to my television set every time Hector came on.
because a good wrestler can get over a bad gimmick, man. There we go. There's the man.
There is the man. I mean, I know we've talked about him a couple of times already. Eddie not only carried on the Guerrero name. That's why I have to give him his own call out and props here. You just cannot do a story on Hispanic and Latino wrestling without Latino heat himself. He became the
Absolutely.
most famous of the Guerreros by far, and he became a huge star around the world. Obviously, he started in Mexico, wrestling on the other side of the border, and found some fame in ECW, made it to WCW, and then finally WWE. Lie, cheat, steal, man. So many moments.
So many
Um,
moments, dude. I was watching earlier this weekend. I was watching it's an in-ring promo that Eddie cut when he was feuding with Brock very very early on. I mean, Brock is so young, in this is but Eddie's working the whole thing of, hey, you call me a junkie. Yeah, I am an addict. I am and just goes into this such heartfelt, emotional promo that, just leaves the crowd stunned. And just is just an amazing piece of in-ring work where he just on the stick. And then we talk about his actual in-ring work. My
oh my
goodness.
gosh.
My goodness.
Some of your favorites, Doug. I don't know if you have particular favorites, but his ECW classic, I didn't see it when it first was happened, but I went back obviously and years later when I became a fan. The match he had in ECW that got him noticed with Dean Malenko. That's what got the attention of Eric Bischoff in WCW. Of course, in WCW, his matches with Jericho, his classic Halloween Havoc match with Ray. My
Absolutely.
God,
Yeah, my
that
my
holds
fa-
up.
my favorite Eddie moment though is when Eddie, Benoit, Perry
Oh,
Saturn, and Dean Malenko, the Radicals, show up. Like, they leave WCW one Monday, the next Monday when Bischoff, they called Bischoff's bluff and they just left. You can have your contracts, you can go, whatever. These four guys get up the next week, they're sitting in the audience and they come over the barricade and you're
oh
introduced to the
gosh.
to the Radicals. That was great stuff right there.
It was a wild west era of wrestling. I mean, it was
Yes.
a big deal that they jumped that
Yes, they jumped
line and
ship.
went to the other
Yeah,
promotion. And
absolutely.
the knock on Eddie was going to be back from his WCW days is that he can work, but he doesn't have a character. And boy,
Yes.
did he show Eric Bischoff, because lie, cheat, steal. The whole like I'm going to throw the chair gimmick and pretend that I'm down. I mean, fans
Yes.
ate it up.
It,
Uh,
so good.
you say moments in WWE, WWF at the time, the feud he had with Rey Mysterio
Mm.
over who Dominic's true dad was.
Yes. Yes.
It was, I mean, I don't care if he was working the heel side or the face side, Eddie Guerrero would draw you in. His work in WWF was not just the great promos too. He had matches there that, defeating Brock Lesnar, which seemed impossible, that
Right.
the kid that was considered too small or didn't have a character goes over Brock Lesnar and becomes a world champion. That was a great moment. And then I think even better than that, just as far as the match goes, but the match he had defending that title at WrestleMania against Kurt Angle
Mhm.
was just, my goodness. I know this LWO revival that's happening in WWE right now would have made Eddie smile if he could
Yeah.
look down and see that, right?
Absolutely, man. Absolutely.
And the last one I have, the last slide I have as far as going through, I mean, the most famous luchador of all time, right?
I really think so. I mean, you say luchador, you know, at least an American audience, this is the man they're going to think of. This is the name they're going to be able to roll off. These even non-wrestling fans are going to be able to say, "Oh yeah, Rey Mysterio. I know that he wears the mask, right?"
Globally, you hit it right there. I mean, we could talk about all these important individuals who contributed, and there was so much in the way of the history of Mexican wrestling and Puerto Rican wrestling and just Hispanic wrestling in general that contributes to what we watch today. But this man did it on the biggest stage. He was there at the time that the style was being popularized globally. He happened to be there during the Monday Night Wars when there were more eyes glued. And so when people think Lucha Libre, high flying, colorful mask, the picture they get in their head, even if they don't know the name, this is the picture they get in their head is
Yeah.
they think of Rey Mysterio. And what's really cool is that, dude's still doing it right now and at a level way higher than could and should be expected from somebody his age. Obviously, matches and moments. I mentioned the Eddie match at Halloween Havoc. Uh, that was, I didn't see him in ECW, so WCW is when I first got exposed to him too, and he had those great matches with guys you mentioned earlier, like Psychosis and Juventud. In WWE, his work with Eddie, again, prime. His match with Angle and Jericho, prime. He had a great match with HBK, and again, he's inspired so many of the luchadors that we know and love today, including his own son.
And man, let me tell you, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, Dom will be talked about as one of the greats. I mean, this kid brings so much heat right now. I didn't realize until probably this weekend when I was rewatching the NXT show from Tuesday night how much heat, you know, and then SmackDown, how much heat Dom just generates. I mean, it is.
Oh gosh.
It,
Triple H said it right. I always thought they piped in that noise too. I didn't. I mean, it's so loud when the crowd starts to booing, and it's a really good way to bring it home, right? So like we know we could not be comprehensive, but we wanted to touch on just how many decades of wrestling history there is out of Mexico and our in the Caribbean and Puerto Rico and just the Hispanic influence on wrestling. But let's bring it home by talking Dom and the folks today, because today there is more exposure to Hispanic wrestlers for a global audience than at any time in history. You don't have to read about them in the magazines. You don't have to wait for Eric Bischoff to bring somebody in to open up a WCW Nitro match or something like that. There is Hispanic talent spread throughout all of the major federations. Doug, starting with AEW, who are some of your favorites on TV today?
Oh man, the Lucha Brothers, man, absolutely, the Lucha
Next
Brothers.
level, man.
Both Pentagon and Phoenix. I think if I had to pick a favorite out of the two, I would say Penta. But that's
Bandito.
Bandito. You know what, man? Bandito, El Kingo, Viking El Kingo.
Oh, El King,
I mean,
yeah.
Kingo's
Andrade.
Andrade. I mean, you name Roosh. I mean,
Commander. Like the stuff that dude does is out of this world. I mean, and obviously on the WWE side of the fence, you already mentioned Dom, probably the hottest heel in the business right now.
Absolutely. I mean,
Damian Priest doing that Puerto Rican tradition, Zelina.
Yes.
Dragon Lee, we mentioned him earlier. He's on the fast track to being a star in WWE. So there is never been more high profile presence of Hispanic wrestlers than there is right now. And I go back to what I said at the beginning. I really don't think that there are any of the other wrestling cultures you can look at that have influenced the global flavor of the sport as much as the characters, which weren't what you saw in the early days of American wrestling, but the characters, the colorfulness, the high flying, all the things that so many love about pro wrestling have their origins in the Hispanic culture.
Absolutely. This was a fun little walkthrough. I feel like we barely scratched the surface. I mean, I think we did like a very high level overview, but considering what the topics we're dealing with, I think that's all we can do within an hour. But it's been a good hour.
It's been a good hour, and we appreciate you spending that time with us. And happy Hispanic Heritage Month, the last day of the month here while we're taping this show live on the 15th. So thanks for joining us for that. We're going to hit our big finish.
Let's
And
do
this,
it.
if this is the first time you're joining us, if you tuned in for the topic on Hispanic wrestling, appreciate you doing so. End of each show, we hit our big finish where we talk about the 1, 2, 3, and that's the botch of the week, the performance of the week, and the match of the week. Doug, you want to kick us off?
Let's talk botch of the week, Kevin. We
Let's
touched
do it.
we touched on this very early on in our news segment, but what is Tony Khan doing? What is going on with this man? These are botches. You know, I understand the spirit of competition, a little poking the bear or whatever, just the trash talking. It's part of it. It's part of like the carny spirit almost to get, to draw the people in with the almost ridiculousness of it. But the crap that Tony is doing pre and post Tuesday, come on, dude. What is this? Who is the adult in the room? Is it CM Punk? I mean,
back when they were on opposite each other on Wednesdays and NXT had to make a retreat, and you could almost understand Tony gloating a little bit. Give him that. But when you go head to head with the competition on their night now, and not their main brand, this wasn't Raw or SmackDown. This is considered the secondary brand. And even if it wasn't your normal night, if you get your tail handed to you, maybe don't look like a sore loser by going out of your way to constantly like try to belittle what the competition did. They're not. I mean, you didn't hear Triple H go out there and start taunting AEW. They just let everything stand for itself. And Tony has made himself look worse by not being able to shut up.
He totally has made him look so worse. I mean, we've seen this dude live and he is hyped on something, man. I can just see him yelling at his phone and feverishly typing his tweets. It's like, come on, dude, just take a breather. You got a great product. You got to, focus on your talent and stop inflating numbers. First of all, stop the ridiculous trash talking. I'm cool with some trash talking, but dude, just it's okay. It's okay. You got something good. Just take a breath, man.
My botch of the week, Doug, also comes from AEW, and I'm going to make simple on this one. For the second straight week in a row, I had to watch the end of Dynamite on YouTube because of the TBS broadcast cutting off way early. Tony, spend less time tweeting and maybe more time on the production. I don't know if you got monkeys in the truck or what, but like suddenly I'm like, my audio is going out every week. My broadcast cuts off. Like, seriously, that's unacceptable for a major league promotion on a major cable network like TBS and TNT to continually have these issues. You got to tighten that up.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, there's a good product there. It's a great product. It's a great time to be a wrestling fan, but come on, tighten this up.
You gave me a great segue, Doug. Can I go on my performance of the week then?
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I know last week I went broad by just giving it to all of NXT. I'm going to go broader. I'm going to go give it to everybody on Tuesday nights. The Tuesday Night War was my performance of the week. It was one night. It's not really a competition either. There's no real stakes involved. There's just these momentary bragging rights, but still, wasn't Tuesday night fun, wrestling fans? If you watch, really, I mean, was it not fun? We had great matches like, Carmelo Hayes versus Braun Breaker and title changes on the other side, like Sheeta taking the AEW women's belt off of Saraya. Had moments like, the debut of Adam Copeland or Cody Rhodes in NXT talking about his dad for the first time on NXT and announcing the Dusty Classic. Cena and LA Knight in front of a hot, intimate, small crowd. And we had Brian Pillman Jr., his first speaking promo. And then they had The Undertaker show up and give the rub to Braun Breaker. We had both shows going commercial free for the first 30 minutes. And in other words, just Tuesday felt special. There's so much wrestling on TV right now, and there's so many pay-per-views that you get caught in this quick cycle, and it's just hard to make anything stand out. There's way more wrestling than there is time, but it was a nice little throwback to feel like something big was going on Tuesday night. It was fun.
It absolutely was fun. I can't disagree with anything you just said, because again, it's a great time for people like us, people who watch this show, people who watch any wrestling shows, people who were casual fans, people who are coming back in. this is a good time. It's not like the heat that it was in the 90s, but it's a good time to be a wrestling fan again, finally.
Doug, your performer of the week?
So you know what, man? I've been thinking about this, and I'm gonna wrap my performer and my match. My match is up here all at once. You
You
know,
do it, man.
so I'm gonna go performer for Brian Danielson because this man is so hot right now. He's doing what he loves to do, and he's a man who clearly loves what he's doing. Tuesday night, Saturday night, a random Wednesday night, you know. It doesn't matter. Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. Does not matter. This man is doing what he loves. He's knocking it out of the park. And then let's jump to Collision on Saturday night, where he goes above and beyond to make Christian Cage, who needs to look like a very big deal now because we have Adam Copeland, the former Edge, in a program with him. So people need to be reminded that, he was part of something and that he is on the same level as this WWE legend, where I don't think people look at him as like say the Marty Jannetty of Edge and Christian, but he is not, yeah, he is not the Edge of the Edge and Christian group, right? But Brian Danielson goes out of his way to make him such a big deal, such a threat to him. And for that, that's my match, that Saturday night match. And Danielson, performer of the week.
Again, I can't argue with you. I was very torn. I almost named that my match of the week too, because it takes two to tango. Christian
Absolutely.
doesn't get.
Yeah, no.
You're right. He is not the Marty Jannetty at all.
Yeah.
But Brian Danielson, man,
Mm-hmm.
I would have picked that up my match of the week had I not also seen Brian Danielson versus Swerve Strickland on Tuesday night,
right,
which is my match of the week. And it was very close between two Brian Danielson matches. What's the common denominator there? I have been a Danielson mark for a long time. He's been one of my favorite wrestlers. It's just amazing that at this age and stage of the game, he's not, the guy I saw in Ring of Honor in his 20s or the guy in WWE in his 30s. And yet he still is performing at a level that is unbelievable when it comes to realism. His matches and his offense look so stiff, so realistic. Mm-hmm. Everything he does is smooth and perfect. I cannot fault you for the match that you went with, even though I went for another one. But whatever match that we didn't see Brian Danielson have on a random, off, Thursday when nothing was being televised, the dude is just that good.
Because that match with Swerve also great because he goes and he elevates Swerve too. Because Swerve is going to be an AEW champion, or there's something seriously wrong with Tony Khan. But but it was just a great week. Just a great wrestling week.
It was a great wrestling week, and we appreciate anyone who joined us to top off this wrestling week with a look at Hispanic wrestling's influence on the wrestling culture. And with that, Doug, we gotta sign off until next week when we are going to be talking Dark Side of the Ring and whether or not it is good for the business. And we hope if this was your first time joining, please like us, subscribe, tune in again, and we'll see you next week.
Good night, everybody. Go watch some wrestling.